Thank you for staying tuned to NTN. We are standing by for the commencement of the sitting of the House of Assembly scheduled for today, Tuesday, November 24th, 2020. We have papers to be laid by the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs and the Public Service, the Honorable Minister for Infrastructure, Ports, Energy and Labor, the Honorable Minister for Commerce, Industry, Enterprise Development and Consumer Affairs, and the Honorable Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries, Physical Planning, Natural Resources and Cooperatives. We also have motions down for consideration, including the authorization by Parliament for the Attorney General to make an order to declare that the 2017 supplement to the revised edition of the laws of St. Lucia, as specified in the order, shall come into force on such date as may be appointed by such order as an authoritative version of the law. Also, that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to obtain financing from the Export-Import Bank of Taiwan for the purpose of financing the COVID-19 response project. The following bills are down for consideration: Public Finance Management, Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Amendment, and Credit Reporting. We now stand by for the entrance of the Speaker of the House. The ministers are seated, and all measures have been put in place and things have been set in motion for a start in short order. Do stay with us.
Let us pray.
Father in heaven, we just want to give you praise, glory, and honor. We thank you for this privilege. Again, as we gather, we ask for your continued guidance and leadership, and we ask you, God, for your preservation in these difficult and challenging times. We ask for your hands of mercy and grace, and we ask for your healing power and the balm of Gilead to be released on our nation. Almighty God, by whom alone kings reign and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom and understanding, we, thy unworthy servant, here gathered together in thy name, to most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultation, and grant that we have in thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all prejudice, private interest, prejudice, and partial affection, the result of all our counsel may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety and honor and happiness of the Queen, the public will, peace, and tranquility of St. Lucia, and the uniting and knitting together of all the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Ghost be with us all evermore. Amen.
Amen. Good morning, honorable members. I have received word from the member for Dennery South. He has indicated that he will be late because of family emergency. The member for Sufre Fasishap has a constituency engagement, and again he will be running late. And I have received word from the member for Pastor Central, who has indicated that she's unwell and unable to be with us. Statements by ministers. Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, before I begin with my statement, let me take this time to pass on both mine and my cabinet's, my government's acknowledgement of the Governor General's birthday today, and may wish him Godspeed and continued health, and to thank him and his wife for their duty, the way that they've conducted their duty to the state. I also want to take this opportunity, if I can, to congratulate Fortuna Belrose, Senator Fortuna Belrose, who's also celebrating her birthday today. I would also like to acknowledge the passing of not a St. Lucian, but a key international figure, Mayor Dinkins, who was the mayor of New York City, passed away today. And I also would like to take the opportunity, if I may, Mr. Speaker, to thank all of those well-wishers from St. Lucia and internationally for their birthday greetings to me, Mr. Speaker, on Friday that has just passed. It was very heartwarming and very much appreciated, both their well wishes and also their prayers. Speaker, first I would like to read a statement that acknowledges the government's policy as it pertains to fiscal responsibility. As you know, Mr. Speaker, we've been in very difficult times, and certainly government's policy and commitment to fiscal responsibility is critical. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a debilitating impact on many economies across the world and has proven to be as much a healthcare crisis as an economic one. Like many other countries in the Caribbean region, St. Lucia is particularly vulnerable due to its size, geography, and location. The pandemic has presented a perfect example of how the idiosyncrasies of small island developing states, such as St. Lucia, cause economic shocks to the exasperated and lead to disproportionate effects on our socio-economic landscape. The pandemic has resulted in a marked decline in global travel, which has significantly curtailed tourism-related activities locally. Many countries are trying to respond to the pandemic with large segments of their economy closed down, resulting in reduced revenues and increased unemployment levels. Additionally, there has been a significant increase in government expenditures related to augmenting the healthcare system to respond to the coronavirus, providing income support to those who have lost their income, and funding many of the other government response interventions. Prior to COVID-19, St. Lucia recorded real growth of 1.7% in 2019, with growth expectations of 3 to 4% for 2020. Additionally, the country had made significant progress with its economic growth indicators and had attained a debt-to-GDP ratio of just below 60% as the end of March 2020. The debt-to-GDP ratio has spiked on account of projections of a decline in GDP that could be as high now as 20% for fiscal year 2020. Our debt redemption rate has been in the region of 25% this fiscal year. Lower revenues, increased expenditures, and significant debt redemptions have significantly affected our cash flows. For the fiscal year 2020, the government has had to borrow funds from development partners in order to bridge the revenue shortfall and build capacity in the health sector and to mitigate the economic fallout from COVID-19, particularly because the revenue of the government has been significantly eroded. For the fiscal year 2020, tax revenues have fallen by more than 50% in some months. In addition to the shortfall in revenue, the country has also suffered massive unemployment due to the closure of the tourism sector, all necessitating social and economic relief measures aimed at providing support to the poor and vulnerable and those directly impacted as a result of the crisis. Prior to the onset of the pandemic, St. Lucia had experienced a decline in unemployment during the period 2017 to 2019, which was driven by developments in tourism and the construction industry. While the decline observed in St. Lucia's unemployment rate was welcomed, estimates suggest that unemployment as of early June 2020 went back up to 21%, primarily due to the effects of COVID-19. Despite these setbacks, the government of St. Lucia is committed to enhancing its long-term fiscal resilience, stability, and sustainability, while at the same time fostering broad-based inclusive economic growth and development. The government is committed to maintaining strong macroeconomic fundamentals by continuing to implement sound fiscal policies and reducing the debt-to-GDP ratio to a prudential level. The government, being a member of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, has committed to attaining the 2030 debt target set by the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. The government recognizes that a strong public financial management system, a comprehensive budget, and internally consistent and coherent, well-structured medium-term fiscal framework, and a properly designed rules-based fiscal framework are fundamental to enhancing fiscal discipline in the furtherance of its long-term fiscal policy objectives. As such, the government is committed to the following. 1, to establish a working group led by the Ministry of Finance, which will be approved by the Cabinet of Ministers by the 31st of March 2021, to design a rule-based fiscal responsibility framework. This framework will comply with the internationally accepted financial management principles and incorporate the appropriate institutional arrangements, including a fiscal responsibility oversight committee and escape clauses. 2, to approve the design of a rule-based fiscal responsibility framework. This will be approved by Cabinet no later than the 31st of March 2022 for the fiscal year 2022-2023. 3, to enact rules-based fiscal responsibility framework no later than the 31st of March 2023 and to apply the fiscal rules to the budget for the fiscal year 2023-2024 and onwards. 4, to establish fiscal rules which will be aligned with the fiscal policy geared at the attainment of the establishment of 60% debt to GDP target ratio by 2030. The government will ensure that the fiscal rules established will seek to limit the annual growth in central government's current primary expenditures by stipulating a rules-based approach to guide growth in each fiscal year. The fiscal rules will also feature several escape clauses whereby in the event of exceptional and exogenous shocks, the rules could be suspended with pathways back to adoption upon cessation of the shock. The fiscal rules framework will be sufficiently flexible so as not to constrain government's overall policy thrust of boosting economic growth levels and fostering sustainable economic growth and development. Table 1 shows the 5 rules to be developed and adopted under the proposed framework. When our debt to GDP is under 45%, there will be no ceiling imposed. When debt to GDP is between 45 to 55%, real primary current expenditure grows in line with the real GDP trend growth. The trend growth rate, Mr. Speaker, is a 10-year average of our historical growth rates, well, 9-year historical and 1-year projected as to what the growth rate is going to be. When your debt to GDP is 60% to 70%, when your debt to GDP is 55% to 60%, growth of real primary current expenditure will be less than 1% percentage point of that average. So it means whatever the average is, you will deduct 1% from it, and that would be what the constraint on your primary current expenditure will be. When your debt to GDP at 60 to 70%, growth of real primary current expenditure, and would be 2 points less the trend growth rate. And when your debt to GDP is over 70%, that you would have a balanced budget for approximately 2 years. Mr. Speaker, on a secondary statement, we have, in this House, in more recent times, have had cause to understand the debt portfolio of St. Lucia. And so my government has felt it necessary to present a document, and the document will be accompanied by a public debt management policy for St. Lucia, and will also be accompanied by the Ministry of Statistics, a St. Lucia annual debt portfolio report, so for 2019. So we provide members with a very in-depth analysis of our debt situation. So, Mr. Speaker, St. Lucia's first public debt management policy, 2019 annual debt portfolio review, and the quarterly public debt bulletin as at June 30th, 2020 are presented to be tabled in Parliament. According to the public debt initial framework, St. Lucia's fiscal situation has deteriorated over the past year, resulting in elevated debt levels. This deterioration is due primarily to the COVID-19 pandemic. The debt to gross domestic product stood at 59.6% as of December 2019 and is projected to worsen if the debt policies remain and accumulation continues from the loss in revenue experienced from the COVID-19 crisis. The Debt and Investment Unit functioning under the Department of Finance has cited that, should this situation continue along this trend, debt sustainability will become a major concern for our nation. In an effort to address the escalating public debt for St. Lucia, the Debt and Investment Unit has undertaken to reform the framework that premises the design, policy, and legislation for public debt management in St. Lucia. This effort seeks to correct the shortcomings of the current public debt framework, bringing the jurisdiction in line with the best practices and prepare a more robust, comprehensive, uniformed approach to the public debt. Mr. Speaker, given the foregoing, my government presents St. Lucia's first public debt management policy to guide the drafting of the public debt bill. The policy aims to modernize and adhere to international best practices in public debt management while providing clear lines of demarcation to borrow, with a high level of transparency and accountability. It therefore means this document will be the official document to guide the roles of various entities in debt management. Similarly, Mr. Speaker, the document will improve the quality of decisions articulate policy goals providing guidelines for the structure of debt insurance and the operations, of debt issuance and the operations of the debt unit. The document also seeks to provide consistency and instruction to new and transitioning staff within the Department of Finance. As you're aware, Mr. Speaker, we have 3 acts which govern various aspects of borrowing and other public debt management functions. However, there is no overarching framework or connectivity among the various acts. The current legislation governing public debt management are the Finance Administration Act of 2001, the National Savings and Development Bonds Act of 2005, and the Treasury Bills Amendment Act of 2003. The existing legislation does not specify an explicit debt management objective which outlines the costs and risk objectives that the government seeks to achieve when it borrows funds. Debt legislation under the various acts does not require a harmonization of debt management operations across agencies or a mandatory exchange of debt-related information. There is no provision for the establishment of a high-level debt committee that serves in an advisory role and which provides oversight to government's debt management operations. Mr. Speaker, the current legislation does not establish an overall limit on public borrowing. On the domestic side, there is a cap on issuing Treasury bills as established under the Treasury Bills Act. However, there are no limits on external borrowings. The inclusion of an overall borrowing limit will help government to meet its objectives for medium-term fiscal and debt management. In addition to the aforementioned deficiencies in the current practices, which the public debt management policy will address, Mr. Speaker, my government is currently having preliminary discussions with the World Bank for a US $30 million development policy loan. On one of the conditions precedent for the loan is the tabling of a debt report in Parliament and the subsequent publication of the public debt management policy and the debt reports. Accordingly, it is a requirement under the public debt management policy that government publishes on its website a debt management strategy, a report on debt management performance, compile and publish comprehensive debt statistics. Mr. Speaker, the publication of these documents are very critical, particularly in an environment where a high level of uncertainty exists due to COVID-19 pandemic. The debt portfolio review and the quarterly debt bulletin are 2 such documents which we are presenting to Parliament. These will certainly go a long way in assisting stakeholders in making informed financial decisions. Mr. Speaker, the Debt Portfolio Review is an annual report that provides a comprehensive view of St. Lucia's public debt situation over the past 5 years. The review aims to provide a detailed impression of the total public debt portfolio, along with an analysis of the movements in the debt stock over the review period. The review will also explore debt-related issues as identified in the debt management strategy and sustainability analysis and an analysis of the risk indicators of the debt portfolio. It should be noted that the debt bulletin is similar to the debt portfolio review. The debt bulletin is a quarterly report that provides the dispersed outstanding debt of the government, including guaranteed and on-lent loans, and a summary of the debt statistics. The frequency of this report serves as a monitoring mechanism for the government and serves as a useful tool to guide investors in making informed decisions. Mr. Speaker, the reports are available to a wide spectrum of readers spanning across the domestic and foreign markets. They provide a deeper understanding of St. Lucia's debt portfolio. And Mr. Speaker, the public will no longer have to depend on unofficial sources to provide them with public debt information and statistics. A plan of action is appended to the policy document that prioritizes how and when the identified activities are to be undertaken. The policy is also supported by a concise monitoring and evaluation framework that provides an overall structure for tracking progress and for regress in policy implementation. Mr. Speaker, there are many benefits to this strategy outlined above, which includes the publication of the debt bulletin and the debt portfolio review. For this reason, I present for the consideration of this Honourable House the government's plan to publish these reports on a regular basis going forward.
Papers to be laid. Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs and the Public Service.
Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument Number 172 of 2020, COVID-19 Prevention and Control Protocol Fishing Regulations. Statutory Instrument Number 174 of 2020, Legal Profession Eligibility, Weston Richard Anthony James, Order. Statutory Instrument Number 175 of 2020, Legal Profession Eligibility, Klima Daniela Shireen Wade, Order. Statutory Instrument Number 176, COVID-19 Prevention and Control Prohibition of Assembly, Order. Statutory Instrument Number 177 of 2020, Legal Profession Eligibility, Whedon Orlando Daily, Order. Statutory Instrument Number 178 of 2020, Legal Profession Eligibility, Adelaide David Samuel Dorset, Order. Statutory Instrument Number 179 of 2020, Finance Administration Act, Resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital expenditure, Village Tourism Initiative. Statutory Instrument 180 of 2020, Finance Administration Act, Resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital expenditure COVID-19 additional financing for the Health System Strengthening Project. Statutory Instrument Number 181 of 2020, Finance Administration Act, Resolution of Parliament to guarantee a line of credit to the St. Lucia Development Bank for on lending to micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. Statutory Instrument Number 182 of 2020, Value-Added Tax Resolution in Parliament to approve draft value-added tax rate tax tourism sector goods and services order. Statutory Instrument Number 183 of 2020, Finance Administration Act, Resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital expenditure COVID-19 crisis response. Statutory Instrument Number 184 of 2020, Finance Administration Act, Resolution to authorize the Minister of Finance to guarantee borrowing by the St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority from a syndicate of banks led by the Bank of St. Lucia to finance the Hunora International Airport Redevelopment Project. Statutory Instrument Number 185 of 2020, COVID-19 Prevention and Control Physical Distancing, Number 3, Order. Statutory Instrument Number 186 of 2020, COVID-19 Prevention and Control Prohibition of Assembly, Number 3, Order. Statutory Instrument Number 187 of 2020, COVID-19 Prevention and Control Physical Distancing, Number 3, Amendment, Order. Statutory Instrument Number 188 of 2020, Value-Added Tax Rate of Tax, Tourism Sector Goods and Services Order. Statutory Instrument Number 190 of 2020, Excise Tax Amendment of Schedule 1, Number 16, Order. National Insurance Corporation Annual Report, July 2018 to June 2019. St. Lucia Financial Services Regulatory Authority Annual Report, 2019. And Citizenship by Investment 2019-2020 Annual Report.
Honorable Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries, Physical Planning, Natural Resources and Cooperatives.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the following people standing in my name: Banana Industry Trust Corporation Company financial statement for the year ending March 31st, 2020.
Honorable Minister for Commerce, Industry, Enterprise Development, and Consumer Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers standing in my name: Statutory Instrument Number 173 of 2020, Price Control Amendment Number 7, Order. Statutory Instrument Number 189 of 2020, Price Control Amendment Number 18, Order.
Motions. Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs, and the Public Service.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. And whereas by Section 10.3 of the revised edition of the Laws Act Cap 1.07, it is provided that the Attorney General may, by order published in the Gazette, declare that a revised edition of the Laws of St. Lucia specified in order shall come into force, and at such date as may be appointed by the order. And whereas the Section 10.4 of the revised edition of the Laws Act 107, it is provided that an order in respect of a complete revised edition of the laws shall not be made until after the passing of a resolution of Parliament authorizing the making of such an order. And whereas by Section 13.5 of the revised edition of the Laws Act 107, it is provided that a replacement, insertion, deletion, or amendment pursuant to this section shall have no effect unless made under and in accordance with the order of the Attorney General under Section 10.3. And whereas it is further provided by the Section 13.6 of the revised edition of the Laws Act Cap 107 that a revised edition in whatever format marked with the latest revision date is deemed to be the authorized revised edition of the laws of which Section 10.4 applies. Be it resolved that Parliament do authorize the Attorney General to make an order to declare that the 2017 supplement of the revised edition of the St. Lucia, of the Laws of St. Lucia, as a specified in the order shall come into force on such date as may be appointed by such order, as an authoritative version of the law. Mr. Speaker, by this resolution, the Attorney General seeks Parliament's authorization for the making of the order of the 2017 supplement to the revised edition of the laws. The revision and consolidation of the laws of the St. Lucia and the preparation and publication of revised editions of the laws in various formats is provided under the revised edition of the Laws Act Cap 107. According to the Act, the Attorney General, the Law Revision Commission, consequently, the Attorney General is responsible for declaring that the revised edition of the Laws of St. Lucia, as specified in the order published in the Gazette, is effective from the date stated in the order under Section 10.3 of the Act. The Act additionally provides under Section 10.4 that the Law Revision Commission cannot make an order unless a resolution of Parliament authorizing the making of the order is passed. Further, the Act provides under Sections 13.5 that a replacement, insertion, deletion, or amendment has no effect unless an order is made to that effect. A revised edition, irrespective of the form that it takes, for example, as in this case, CD-ROM or other means of electronic storage and loose-leaf booklets with the latest revision date, is considered to be the authentic version of the Laws of St. Lucia according to Section 13(6) of the Act. Parliament authorized the making of the 2015 supplement to be to the revised edition of the law's commencement order in keeping with the provisions of the Act in 2019. This resolution, Parliament will authorize the Attorney General to make an order to declare that the 2017 supplement to the revised edition of the laws of St. Lucia, which takes the forms stated above, that is a CD-ROM or other means of electronic storage, and loose-leaf booklets, as specified in the order, will have effect from the date specified in the order as a genuine translation of the law of St. Lucia for the years 2016-2017. In the draft 2017 supplement to be revised edition of the law's commencement order, attached to the resolution mentioned is made to the resolution that we passed today, and the commencement date for the revised edition of the laws as a date of publication of the order of the Gazette. In addition, the order identifies the chapters in which the acts which were passed in 2016 and 2017 are incorporated in the 2017 revised laws of St. Lucia. The Attorney General, as Law Revision Commission, is therefore seeking the approval of Parliament to make the 2017 supplement to the revised edition of the law's commencement order to include the 2017 revised edition of the laws, the acts that were passed in 2016 and 2017.
Honorable members, the question is that Parliament do authorize the Attorney General to make an order to declare that the 2017 supplement to the revised edition of the laws of St. Lucia, as specified in the order, shall come into force on such date as may be appointed by such order as an authoritative version of the law. Member for Dennery North.
Mr. Speaker, just a very brief observation with respect to the revised laws of St. Lucia. And I'm not even sure if this is the... Yes, and I was saying I'm not even sure if this intervention is for this motion. But I've found myself in a situation as it relates to the laws of St. Lucia where, as a sitting MP, Mr. Speaker, considering we are lawmakers, and the Parliament is the highest decision-making forum in our country. This is where we make the laws, this is where we change laws, we amend laws. And sometimes when you discharge your responsibilities as a parliamentary rep, you do not have access to the laws of the country. And I'm suggesting here today that in much the same way you see government offices, the offices of permanent secretaries and ministers have a full complement of the laws of St. Lucia, I believe the time has come for us to so equip the office of parliamentary representatives. I know this is fairly procedural, but it's an observation I really needed to make because I found myself in situations where, of course, I'm not a lawyer by training, but there are times when you just want to reference the law to provide guidance to the constituents who come knocking at your door almost on a daily basis as you try to address their needs. So I just want to place on the record that I believe that the laws ought to be placed at the offices of parliamentary representatives, and that, like the order supplies, few as they may be, provided by the office of the Parliament, that a full complement of the laws, that too would be the property of the office of the Parliament, just happen to be stationed in the constituency office. Thank you.
Honorable members, the question is that Parliament do authorize the Attorney General to make an order to declare that the 2017 supplement to the revised edition of the laws of St. Lucia, as specified in the order, shall come into force on such date as may be appointed by such order as an authoritative version of the law of St. Lucia. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I beg to lay before the House this motion standing in my name. And certainly before I address it, the member from Dennery North's appeal, I think, is welcomed by our side as well. And I'm hoping that the Speaker, who is responsible for the maintenance, Parliament is responsible for the maintenance of parliamentarians' offices, would have been noted and probably suggest that he put something, an appeal to the Minister of Finance to assist in making that happen. I'm sure it would be received welcomely. Whereas it is provided by Section 39(1) of the Finance Administration Act, Cap 1501, the act that the Minister of Finance may, by resolution of Parliament, borrow money from a bank or other financial institution for the capital or recurrent expenditure of the government. And whereas it is further provided by Section 42(1) of the Act that there shall be charged on and paid out of the Consolidated Fund debt charges for which the government is liable. And whereas the Minister of Finance considers it necessary to borrow the sum of $20 million US from the Export-Import Bank of the Republic of China for the purpose of financing the COVID-19 response project. And whereas the loan is repayable in 30 consecutive equal or nearly equal as possible semi-annual installments, the first of which must be made on the last day of the 66-month period from the date of the first advance under the loan is made by the Export-Import Bank of the Republic of China, and thereafter on the last day of each successive 6-month period. Speaker, if I can just repeat. And whereas the loan is repayable in 30 consecutive nearly equal as possible semi-annual installments, in the first of which must be made on the first day of the 66-month period from the date the first advance under the loan is made by the Export-Import Bank of the Republic of China, Taiwan, and thereafter on the last day of each successive 6-month period. And whereas if the full amount of the loan has been drawn down, each installment must be in the amount of $666,667, except for the last installment must be the amount of $666,657. Otherwise, the amount of each installment shall be adjusted by the Export-Import Bank of the Republic of China, Taiwan. And whereas interest is payable at a rate of 6-month London Interbank offered rate plus 1.5% per annum. And whereas the loan payments must commence after the grace period of the 5.5 years have expired. Be it resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow the sum of US $20 million from the Export-Import Bank of the Republic of China, Taiwan, for the purpose of financing the COVID-19 response project. Be it further resolved that the loan is repayable in 30 consecutive equal or as nearly equal as possible semi-annual installments, for the first of which must be made on the last day of the 66-month period from the date for this the first advance under the loan agreement is made by the Export-Import Bank of the Republic of China, Taiwan, and thereafter on the last date of each successive 6-month period. If the full amount of the loan has been drawn down, each installment must be made in the amount of $666,667, except that the last installment must be in the amount of US $666,657. Otherwise, the amount of each installment shall be adjusted by the Export-Import Bank of the Republic of China, Taiwan. Interest is payable at a rate of 6% of a 6-month London interbank offered rate plus 1.5% per annum, and the loan payments must commence after the grace period of 5.5 years have expired. Mr. Speaker, this resolution before Parliament is to seek approval to borrow United States US $20 million from the Export-Import Exim Bank of the Republic of China, Taiwan, to finance the COVID-19 response project. Mr. Speaker, in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis, the government had to implement very strong measures and institute protocols to reduce the effects of health pandemic on the population. Some of the measures that were implemented included the closing of our borders, social distancing, and extended curfew hours. This was all in an effort to reduce the spread of the virus and to keep our citizens safe. Mr. Speaker, recognizing the impact of these measures would have on the central government fiscal accounts and our ability to manage the affairs of the state, my government took the decision to redirect the loan funding that was originally negotiated with the ROCT Exim Bank for the agricultural feeder roads to the COVID-19 response project. In essence, a repurposing of the loan. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 response project is essentially the plans that have been enunciated by this government to protect the lives and livelihoods of our citizens. The priorities of the COVID-19 response project, Mr. Speaker, are to ensure the health and safety of the population, to preserve jobs and provide support to laid-off workers, to provide direct social assistance to vulnerable populations, and to stimulate the domestic economy. Mr. Speaker, the loans funds will be used to finance some of the initiatives articulated in the Social Stabilization and Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan. Mr. Speaker, the number of positive COVID-19 cases in St. Lucia is now in excess of 200. At the time we requested this finance, Mr. Speaker, we only had 1 positive case. Understanding the emerging threat, we indicated the rehabilitation and retrofitting of sections of the Victoria Hospital to convert it to the respiratory hospital. It has been transformed into an 82-bed facility and is currently approximately 92% capacity. In that context, some of these resources will be used to complete the ancillary works for the full conversion of the Victoria Hospital to ensure that it can function as a dedicated respiratory hospital. Resources will also be allocated to the 5 respiratory clinics to ensure continued access by the population. Mr. Speaker, we need to maintain a consistent supply of personal protective equipment from frontline to essential workers, as well as supplies for COVID-19 testing. Loan resources will also be utilized for that purpose. Mr. Speaker, the resources identified for the Agricultural Assistance Program to provide targeted support to farmers and fishers to increase their productivity, supply and demand for locally grown produce also forms part of this project. The Ministry of Agriculture will coordinate this component to ensure that the farmers and fishers receive the requisite assistance. As part of the COVID-19 response, Mr. Speaker, the government is implementing the Love St. Lucia campaign. The goal of the campaign is to build resilience in the St. Lucian economy by encouraging hobby farming, maximizing the potential for local industry, improving consumer awareness, and increasing domestic market share of our local manufacturers and service providers. In addition to the direct support provided by the Ministry of Commerce, through this campaign, approximately $5 million EC will be provided to the St. Lucia Development Bank to establish a line of credit to provide working capital loans to medium, small, and micro businesses. The Ministry of Finance will be responsible for the implementation of this loan facility and will coordinate with implementing and executing agencies. Mr. Speaker, the loan facility from the Exim Bank will be disbursed in 3 tranches of 50%, 25%, and 25% respectively. Mr. Speaker, the loan will be repaid semi-annually in the amount of US $666,000 and $67 over the repayment period. Mr. Speaker, The terms and conditions of the COVID-19 response project loan are similar to other loans negotiated with the Exim Bank. It carries a tenure of 15 years, an interest rate of LIBOR plus 1.5%, and a moratorium of 5 years. Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that we successfully negotiated 2 special conditions to ease the burden of repayments should it become necessary as follows. In the event of cumulative interest rate reaches 5%, the government reserves the right to renegotiate the interest component of the loan with the lender. This facility allows the government an opportunity to renegotiate the interest rate once it reaches 5%. Natural disaster energy clause, consideration of a clause to defer loan payments given St. Lucia's vulnerabilities to natural disasters and in the event that the island is impacted by a catastrophic event such as a hurricane, flood, drought, or earthquake. Mr. Speaker, we understand that the risk to lives and livelihoods and believe that this level of support that this loan affords us at the time is quite timely. In addition to providing financing for the central government initiatives, it also provides some relief to the private sector so that the micro enterprises can access working capital to increase their production levels. Mr. Speaker, this loan financing is necessary to augment our efforts geared at mitigating the COVID-19 pandemic, and let me explain why. Mr. Speaker, in April of 2020, the Department of Finance projected real GDP decline of 10% in 2020. That decline was predicated on a 35% drop in the accommodation and food service sectors and a 10% decline in our agricultural industry. Based on data available to the Department of Finance, as of October 2020, the forecast has been further revised downwards to 26.3% of real GDP. The contributing factors to the worsening of the 2020 outlook are as follows. Lower than expected developments in the accommodation and food service sectors, 67% versus our initial estimate of 35%. Sharper than expected decline in agriculture, which we now estimate to decline by 15.2% from 1%. Mr. Speaker, our 2020 estimates for gasoline consumption as of September 2020 registered an almost 16% decline and a 14% decline in non-fuel related imports. Our initial estimates were predicated on a worst, medium, and best case scenario for the impact of COVID-19 on stay arrivals. In our worst case scenario, we had anticipated a decline of 132,000 stayover arrivals. The arrivals to date have exceeded this. However, we are still struggling to return to pre-COVID levels, as expected. Mr. Speaker, the initial estimates projected a revenue loss in the region of $200 million. The revised year-end outlook suggests $298 million loss, which is much higher than what was previously estimated. It's important to note that these revisions reflect the fact that the April to June contractions were worse than initially estimated. Mr. Speaker, we compare revenue collection in 2020 with the same period in 2019, we can better understand the fiscal strain. Revenue collection in April of 2020 was 49% below April 2019. We all know what happened in April this year, Mr. Speaker, and the quarters ending in June and September are 45% and 41% below the same period of 2019. In October, however, we were 10% higher than 2019, largely due to the receipts of corporate income tax. Mr. Speaker, the cash gap currently facing our country is further exacerbated by the higher than normal redemption of government debt instruments. For the fiscal year, we've experienced a 25% redemption rate from our investors. While the government of St. Lucia has never defaulted on its debt obligations and remains committed to honoring all payments to individuals and institutional investors, as well as the repayments of all government loans and credit facilities, it has placed significant strain on our cash flow. This, Mr. Speaker, is simply a reality of our economic fallouts from COVID-19, as many investors are indeed in need of liquidity themselves. Mr. Speaker, the upside of that is that in paying off those loans, it has a positive impact on our debt to GDP. Mr. Speaker, to reduce the $298 million cash gap, which we've referenced earlier, we've had to borrow from the international financial institutions to respond to the crisis. We borrowed from the IMF, CDB, ECCB, and the World Bank, and now the Export-Import Bank of China, Taiwan. We also had to negotiate new overdraft arrangements with the domestic financial institutions, and in particular the ECCB. Mr. Speaker, as alluded to earlier, this $20 million loan will assist in addressing some of the critical needs that we've been unable to address as a result of the significant shortfall in revenues, which is now estimated at about $298 million. Mr. Speaker, whilst we've undertaken to borrow monies to support our budgetary needs, we have not done so carelessly. The IFIs have great confidence in our nation's ability to recover from this crisis and to bring our economy back on path of a sustainable economic growth. As such, we request approval from this Honorable House for the proposed borrowing. Again, Mr. Speaker, let me indicate that when we came to this House to approve the appropriations bill, these amounts were already included. And while it does constitute borrowings, these are borrowings that are made in the context of the budget that we had put in place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, the question is that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow the sum of US $20 million from the Export-Import Bank of the Republic of China for the purpose of financing the COVID-19 response project. Be it further resolved that A, the loan is repayable in 30 consecutive equal or as nearly equal as possible semi-annual installments, the first of which must be made on the last day of the 66-month period from the date of the first advance under the loan agreement is made by the Export-Import Bank of the Republic of China, and thereafter on the last day of each successive 6-month period. B, if the full amount of the loan has been drawn down, each installment must be in the amount of US $666,667, except that the last installment must be in the amount of US $666,657. Otherwise, the amount of each installment shall be adjusted by the Export-Import Bank of the Republic of China. C, interest is payable at a rate of 6-month London interbank offered rate plus 1.5% per annum. D, the loan payments must commence after grace period of 5.5 years have expired. Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I continue with my contribution, I would like, most likely, if he is so minded, he will respond in his rebuttal. The Minister of Finance said that these amounts, the 54 million EC dollars that he is borrowing now, was already considered or was already included in the budget. Earlier on in the same speech, he said that that loan was a response to COVID, and he also said that he'd repurposed some of the loans from the same Exim Bank some of the roads, some of the money that was borrowed for road construction. So I just need to find out what really is it. Is it a response to COVID, the $20 million? Was it already accounted for in the budget? That means at the time of the budget, we knew there would have been COVID. Or free, whether it was a repurposing of the Taiwanese loan. Just want to find out. I'm not that. Just need to find out this, because three things were said. Three things. Which one is correct? I'll say it again. One, the Minister of Finance said his last expression was, these loans were already accounted for in the budget statement. First statement. Early on, he said that is a direct response to COVID because of the downturn in the economy and revenue because of COVID. And in the same discussion, he said that he'd repurpose some of the Taiwanese loans. He said these things in three. So I just want to get a clarification. It's just my right to ask that. Mr. Speaker, we're borrowing now another $54 million for COVID response, Mr. Speaker. And that is in addition to the $81 million we did before the COVID crisis response, another $77 million from the IMF. This is $212 million we've borrowed directly for COVID. That is notwithstanding the amount that up to this day, we do not know what's our balance on the ECCB. We haven't heard what the balance is. We heard that the government has used their facility at the ECCB. We do not know the balances. We haven't been told the balances. We know that the overdraft limit is $55 million. The Prime Minister said this morning that they had increased the overdraft from the bank, from the commercial banks. We do not know exactly how much it was. And these are things that the Prime Minister said, and it's my right to ask for clarification. He said that he'd drawn down on the ECCB balances. He said that he'd increased the overdraft, and right now he's doing his borrowing from COVID. And Mr. Speaker, this is serious business. We're not in the business to score points and come after people. We're in the business to get clarification in what is a serious situation in this country. The government pretends that they are living in an alternative reality. Mr. Speaker, things are rough in St. Lucia. Families are suffering. People are finding themselves without food at their homes. This is a serious situation. So we can come here to score political points and go after people. But the reality is, Mr. Speaker, even if the government is living in an alternative reality, things are rough. People are suffering because their lives and their livelihoods are being affected, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the electricity response that the government, Mr. Speaker, you know, it's okay for us to sit down because we have our businesses, we know how to make money, we know how to make money for ourselves, we boast about our ability to make money and laugh at people. That's what we want to do in this house, because we know what's in our pot, how we are living, how we know how to make money, how we can exchange 5 cents to 5 million. But other people cannot do that, Mr. Speaker. So when I stand and I speak, I'm speaking for the majority of people in this country who are suffering in spite of what we stay here and we do. In spite of what we do here, people are suffering. Middle-income people, Mr. Speaker, are suffering because in most of the houses, some people have lost their income from the hotels. And those who have gained their income is less than before because their service charge has decreased, Mr. Speaker. So the reality is, we have to make a serious understanding. We have to understand seriously, what is the situation in St. Lucia. And when we debate, and that is why, Mr. Speaker, I took part in the initiative by the Chamber of Commerce. because I thought it was one occasion where the hands of the politicians would not be in it. And I asked for equity in how the benefits of that initiative would be dispensed among the people. It was the hands of the politicians, the hands of I'll make you cry. That was not there, Mr. Speaker. The hands of I'm going for you, I'll take you on. That was not there. That is why I took part, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, so I am very concerned, Mr. Speaker, that this $54 million loan that we are taking, Mr. Speaker, and it's a relatively short-term loan. Again, I want to get clarification from the Prime Minister. He said that the loan is for 15 years, a 15-year duration. What I read here is the loan is repayable in 30 consecutive installments, and it is must be paid on the last day of the 66-month period from the date of advance on the loan. Can I get some clarification? He said 15 years. And 66 months is 5 years, and the consecutive 40 consecutive months is 2 years and 6 months. So I really need to get, so that to me that looks like 96 months. He said 15 years. So it's a relative short-term loan, Mr. Speaker, as far as I see. Which one?
Continue on, remember.
So, Mr. Speaker, I really want to get, Mr. Speaker, from the Minister of Finance, a full account. Firstly, a full account of how the original COVID crisis response, the $77 million from the IMF was spent. What we got in the Parliament was 15.5 million EC dollars. The report that came to the Parliament was for 15.5 million EC dollars. What was spent, what was borrowed was $77 million. So there is need, if not today, at some point for the government to give an account of how that was spent, because we know that the respiratory hospital is still under tremendous pressure, Mr. Speaker. We also know that our future projections for our tourism industry may find itself flawed, because there's a cry now for a second testing, not only from the opposition, but from people in the industry, from the medical people, that there may be need for second testing. I want to find out where the government intends to do that, and whether some of these resources will be used for the costing of the paying for that second testing, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the COVID, the Prime Minister made a point about the decline of GDP, the decline in GDP of 18 to 26%, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to just bring your attention to a World Bank report in 2020, when it predicted that the economies of the region, the economies of the OECS, St. Vincent with a decline by 5.5%, St. Kitts by 8.1%, Antigua by 10.8%, Grenada by 8%, and Dominica by 4.7%. We are speaking about an economy that was beautifully managed, that would have growth of 4% before, and how our revenue was overperforming, and we were the best managed economy in the region. I'd be grateful if I can get the reasons why it seems, I can be corrected, it seems that our economy has declined more than any other economy in the OECS, according to a World Bank report of 2020. There must be a reason for that, Mr. Speaker, because we were the best managed economy. We had the gurus managing our economy. Mr. Speaker, I heard this morning, I hope I get a copy of the statement by the Honorable Prime Minister about debt management. And he spoke about the year 2020 and the year 2021. As far as I know, the period of St. Lucia, 21, and he's talking about the year 2022. he spoke about March 2021 and March 2022. As far as I know, according to the Constitution, unless you become like a Trumpian, the people of St. Lucia will have to make a decision before March 2022. So I'm a little concerned that the government of St. Lucia, they are making projections and taking serious policy decisions when between now and September's maximum, they may very well be a lame duck government. I would hope that the government would have,
Honorable members.
I would hope, Mr. Speaker, that the government would consider the fact that the people of St. Lucia will have a decision to make at its latest by September 2021, before they make plans for 2022 and 2023. So, Mr. Speaker, I am very concerned that the use of that COVID response money is not for political purposes. I have heard nothing about the DFCs, the direct finance contracts that are being given all over the country. I don't know how that is included in the debt profile. If it's included, I know very soon we are going to be debating the finance management bill, and we're going to be debating the public procurement bill. But as we speak, roads have been built, all without public tender, all at amounts that are just stated on the radio, not by the chief engineer, but just people who I don't know about their engineering genius are just making statements about how we choose a contractor for $15 million. Just because I was appalled by a gentleman, and I'm talking about borrowing, Mr. Speaker, a gentleman on the radio saying how he chose $15 million, and then he chose this one because that one didn't have enough money to do it, Mr. Speaker. I know that roads are under the direction of the chief engineer, and when there's a special projects unit, the chief engineer oversees that special projects unit. It's my right, Mr. Speaker, because that $15 million is going to be repaid. It has to be repaid, Mr. Speaker. So whereas we speak about all these big plans for papers, documents, Mr. Speaker, these realities must be discussed. It's our right to discuss them, Mr. Speaker. It's our right. So I would like to know, in this borrowing, this revenue gap that we have, it was $298 million, then I hear it was $218 million, Mr. Speaker. 298 in the same speech, 218 in the same speech. Which one is right? We have to, Mr. Speaker, we have to discuss the people's business in a way that is transparent, that is accountable, even though the news may not benefit our political song or our political position. We need to see it in a transparent way, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that part of that money also is supposed to be used for the revival of the tourism industry, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are several small hotels that have not opened. There are many small hotels that have not opened, Mr. Speaker. The people who have the Airbnb, they've not opened because they have not met the COVID protocols. They ought to be able to share in any increase in the tourism revenue, Mr. Speaker. We need to, I hope some of that revenue would be used, some of that money, that loan would be used to help them to get back on their feet, Mr. Speaker. Because there is reality out there. There is a reality that some of us may not be feeling. And I'm not imputing any improper motives. All I'm saying is there's a reality out there that some of us may not be feeling. And we have to come to grips with that situation. We did not cause COVID, but we must understand because of COVID, people are suffering. And no one in this honorable house would like people to suffer. But the reality is people are suffering, Mr. Speaker. Even churches are complaining that their revenue is decreasing. Even churches are complaining, Mr. Speaker. So it's a serious. Small businesses are closing. This is reality. This is reality, Mr. Speaker. And I really hope that we understand that this is reality. That we can come here and attack each other. We can come here and laugh. We can come here and go for each other. But the fact is, out there, people are suffering. There are people who do not have food. Children who are out of school. They have no devices to get their, to learn, Mr. Speaker. And whereas in the great United States, with all its social benefits, people are suffering. There are long lines. You can imagine in this country, Mr. Speaker, what's happening. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, that whilst we borrow that money, and our party will have absolutely no issues in improving the lives and the livelihoods of the people of St. Lucia. So I appeal, Mr. Speaker, for equity, for balance. I also appeal for a touch of reality, because what is happening in this country is serious. And we have to understand that and stop living in an alternative reality. Because facts are, our people, many of our people are suffering, Mr. Speaker. I thank you.
Member for Castries South. Honorable members, before the member commences his presentation, just want to comment in terms of our protocol around this. All I'm suggesting is that if you do not need the desk to write, please step back to allow another member who is preparing for his presentation to so use the space. Honorable member, you may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I joined the Leader of the Opposition and member for Castries East in raising some questions on the resolution which is before us. Mr. Speaker, it essentially brings into focus two issues: that of borrowing, and by extension, incurring debt, and the COVID response of this government. So in raising my issues, I shall focus on those two aspects. Like the Leader of the Opposition, I would have hoped, Mr. Speaker, and I still do hope, that we will get copies of the documents, the statement made by the Prime Minister and the documents he referred to. It is quite interesting that on a day when we come to borrow, the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, member for Miko South, would present to the House statements on government's position on debt management. And essentially, debt management is a consequence of borrowing. But it was quite interesting. The last time we met in this Honorable House 2 weeks ago, we were being presented with a bill to do a finance, the management bill and the procurement bill, which we will deal with in this sitting. One of the bills had come before us in this Honorable House, and I can recall, and we will debate it later, that suggestions were made, especially by the member from Beaufort South. Some of what we discussed then had not really been followed up on, including setting up a committee to look at the bill. But the bill came back before us. And then we were told the reason why it's coming back before us is because for us to get the CDB loan, we are required, because it's a policy-based loan, to put before the House and to pass those two bills. And I listened carefully, and the Prime Minister was presenting the policy and the statement on debt management. And I'm thinking that surely this is, in theory, a very progressive move. Of course, the devil is always in the details. And then I heard he said that this government is negotiating a $40 million US loan from the World Bank, and a requirement of that loan is having in place such a debt management policy, and also to make available publicly data and statistics on debt management. And my optimism fell flat, because there I thought it was really an attempt to be a progressive government and not necessarily a reactive position, because an international institution that wishes to lend money to St. Lucia require those requirements. Be that as it may, we will take it for what it is, and when we see the details, we can debate it. But of course, I ask that we pay heed to the comment made by the member from Catherine East, that one should be a little cautious in how one establishes by legislation policy that will hamstring future governments, because of course we do have an election in the near future. But let's come back to the issue of borrowing by this government, because we are being asked to borrow more money. And I heard the member from Miko South said, this is repurposing a loan, that there was already an application for those monies to be used for agricultural feeder roads. And of course, the member from Catherine East asked a couple of questions, and I'm sure the member from Miko South will respond appropriately. I am not against repurposing of loans. In fact, we call for it. You would recall that in March and many sittings after, we called for repurposing of loans, and we were chastised for doing so. We called for it. We said some of the loans that are before this Parliament, presented through the budgetary statement, should be repurposed. And we were told that y'all know nothing about financial management, y'all know nothing about the economy. We were chastised for asking that they be repurposed. Do you know why we were asking that those loans be repurposed? We were asking because we believed there was an urgent need in this country to pay attention to the COVID management plan and the consequences of COVID on the citizens of this country. We were saying that there is no need to go ahead with certain loans for roads, for airport redevelopment, and instead use those monies for the COVID response. We were saying use those monies to ensure that as a country we have the capacity to deal with COVID. We were calling for repurposing. We sat in this house, and those of us who stood and spoke, the IMF loan of about 70-odd million EC dollars, when we looked at the estimates as to how the monies were going to be used, relocating a garbage dam, paying for the DSH road, a number of other reasons. We said that could not be why you were going to use that money. Use it for COVID, for support for persons affected, to build our capacity. We said so. We were not listened to. And today, we have been asked to support a bill which we are told is repurposing. For me, a resolution. For me, it's too little and too late. Not that we don't need it, we do need it, but we need more than that. We need more than that, Mr. Speaker. We came into this house 2 weeks ago to borrow from the CDB, and we were told it was for COVID response. And 2 weeks later, we're back here borrowing again. We could have done all the things that we have been told this money is going to be used for with monies already borrowed, with monies that have been used for other purposes right now. You see, this government, we've always had an issue with them. Always had an issue with them. This is a government that said that they would not borrow. When in opposition, during the campaign, that they were not going to borrow. They would stop this borrowing. The Labour Party was borrowing too much. And then they got into government and they modified it and they said they would only borrow if there is a revenue stream to repay it. So, of course, the position changes. But this is a government that has, in the last 4.5 years, borrowed over $1.5 billion. This government, almost over $1.5 billion, Mr. Speaker. And I can itemize, I've gone through every single item that has come before this House, and we can itemize it. You know how the member, there's a particular member who stands up every time we speak about the debt. And you know what he does? He looks at the debt in 2016, he looks at it in 2019, 20, and he subtracts it and he sees that only increased by 700 million or whatever. Because he's looking at the stock and he's subtracting it. Of course, he's not saying that debts are being repaid, but we can go through it, itemize it. Itemize it. Almost 1.5 billion, I can almost tell you from my head. But we accept, Mr. Speaker, that government, Mr. Speaker, must borrow. There is no two ways about it. Government must borrow, Mr. Speaker. And there was the COVID pandemic, so you expect the government to borrow because there's a shortfall in revenue. So there has to be borrowing. But it is because of the necessity of borrowing during the pandemic and because of the uncertainty of the future that requires you to be very prudent in your borrowing. This is the imperative that says to you, if I do not need to borrow, I should not borrow. Can somebody explain to me the roundabouts at Rodney Bay? Do we need to borrow money? And don't tell me it's below the line and it is finance. It is a debt on this country. Do we need this at this point in time? Did we need to go ahead with the loan from the consortium of banks for the airport redevelopment at this time? Mr. Speaker, the spate of borrowing from this government did not slow down. It did not stop. And whereas they could have used monies, whether from the IMF, the IDA, CDB, to do the very things that they are doing today, they could have done it, Mr. Speaker, but they did not, because the pet projects, the election projects, are more important than the imperatives of national survival. I want you, Mr. Speaker, if you look at St. Lucia's Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan, a document of this government, of course I like it, because in this document, you are stating to the nation what is your recovery and resilience plan. This is what you've said is, for want of a better descriptive word, your Bible for the COVID recovery. Of about $520 million, 400 are what is called shovel-ready projects. These are projects that the government already had in the pipeline that they intend to continue with. How many COVID-specific projects you see in there? How many? This was not no economic recovery and resilience plan in the true sense of one. Yes, there were activities pertaining to COVID. But essentially, it was just a justification for the government to continue with business as usual. And not just as usual, to have greater latitude. Because there is no tendering, there is no competitive bidding, and they can just award to the FFF. And this explains why, from the start, when we asked a few questions on the process, that we didn't want to be part of the process. Because it was not a genuine process. And I'll come back to this a little later, Mr. Speaker. Again, I want to ask the question, has all the borrowing we've done in this House enhanced our capacity to fight COVID? How has it really enhanced our capacity? I'm still hearing we're borrowing $20 million now. In November, next week is December. We are now repurposing loans to finish the respiratory hospital. Let's think about that. Let's think about that. We knew from March there was a COVID pandemic. We heard experts predicting a winter second wave. We sped okay in the first stage of it, but we heard everyone saying there'll be a second and maybe even a third wave. Mr. Speaker, and we're still hearing today, about facilities we have to spend money on to establish 9 months later. And I was by the hospital yesterday and I saw VH being painted. In all my life, walking next to VH, going to Banan to buy fish and milk from Mr. Laborde and to bathe, I've never seen VH looking so bright. Just as we have left. I'm glad you're clapping. I'm glad you're clapping because I want you to clap for my next statement. We've never seen it look this way. And it's typical of this government to mama guy. So they paint outside bright and inside the COVID patients are in mold-infested rooms. And you know what the Minister of Health said? All over St. Lucia have mold. So what's wrong with COVID patients being in mold-infested rooms? So you're painting outside, making it look bright and beautiful, and inside COVID patients are suffering from being put in mold-infested rooms with water on the floor. And you're telling me, and you're clapping because you painted bright and the hospital looking new, VH is new again. You must have substance, you must be genuine, you must be sincere. So I'm asking again, the borrowing that we've done, do we have more PPE? Do we have more medication for COVID patients? I'm hearing today, this money will now be used for this. That there not enough testing kits. This money will be used for this. We cannot be against that. We cannot be against it. We've been calling for it from March. We've been calling for it. Mr. Speaker, if my memory serves me right, we would have borrowed from the Exim Bank in Taiwan in the last year and a half or so, over $500 million. The airport, St. Jude, housing project, roads rehabilitation, now COVID. That's over $500 million from the Exim Bank. $500 million in about a year and a half. And they still want to deny that there is borrowing going on in this country. Every time we speak about the level of borrowing, they say that's not true, that's not true. Just the Exim Bank. Just the Exim Bank. Now, I'll tell you something. I believe it's an abuse of the friendship of the Taiwanese people and government. If we need money in this country and Taiwan is assisting us, I think we should be grateful and we should be thankful we are friends of Taiwan. But Taiwan has to know the context of this borrowing. There is a powerful statement in the context of the borrowing. A very powerful statement. Almost $500 million from the Exim Bank. But we are told this is necessary and is repurposing. And it's because of the COVID response. You would all recall where we were at the end of September. And I want to state categorically that this government's response to COVID has been disastrous. Disastrous. It has been. Disastrous. So, Mr. Speaker, at the end of September, we had about 27 cases or so. About 27 cases or so. And we heard a lot of opportunistic statements. St. Lucia is among the best in the world. I kept quiet. when you have a few experiences in life, and you know and you understand, how reality unfolds. And at the last seat in here, I said, I know a basketball match has 4 quarters. You don't celebrate after the first quarter. I know a football match has 2 halves. I don't celebrate after the first half. But you strengthen your resolve. You prepare for what's ahead. This government was saying things are so good in this country because we, the government, are doing things right. And the government thanked the people of St. Lucia for cooperating with them because they are doing the right things. But now, Mr. Speaker, things are not looking so good. But you know what? It's not their fault. It's the people's fault. The people have no respect. The people have no respect. And the people must be made to pay for what's happening in this country. And don't get me vexed. You know, it's not their fault. When it was good, it was their hard work. But when it is bad, it's the fault of the people. And you heard the shouts around this morning, it's the Labour Party fault. You see, Mr. Speaker, we were first told that it was the back door that was causing it. But not one fisherman has tested positive yet. Not one. But it was the back door. And I made the comment in the last sitting that 18,000 visitors, we were told, had entered St. Lucia. Not one of them had been negative. And I made the point about law of probability. And a member shouted to me about, what's the law of probability? What probability? And I could not understand how it is 18,000 people were coming in and not one positive. But a few people may have entered for the back door. And they are the ones bringing in COVID. The CMO herself said there is no evidence, no link between the spread and backdoor. But they are trying to make St. Lucians believe that it is the backdoor that's causing the problem. And you know, it was repeated this morning, what is most painful about the comments from members opposite is to say openly, without any shame, in this house, which is supposed to be an honorable house, that is the Labour Party supporters who are super spreaders. For me, Mr. Speaker, this is painful because I am a St. Lucian and I know no St. Lucian wants another one to have COVID or to die from COVID. And to stay in this honorable house as the leaders of this country and to repeat it over and over, the member from Soufrière, the member from Ancillary, the member from Castries Southeast, the Prime Minister himself was the cheerleader that it is your Labour Party supporters that are the super spreaders and cause this spike. This, Mr. Speaker, is shameful, Mr. Speaker. It tells a lot about the character of the individuals who are saying it. We are all leaders of this country. We all have certain responsibilities, and primary among it is not stigmatizing people, Mr. Speaker. To stand up in this house and to say what they've said and to continue to repeat it. And this was a match that got approval from Commissioner of Police, Chief Medical Officer, from NEMO, from everybody. All the experts approved the match, Mr. Speaker. And then we are told that it's Labour Party people that are super spreaders. I hope when the election is called and the super spreaders act, they accept the result, Mr. Speaker. I hope so. But, Mr. Speaker, they might behave like Trump, okay. Mr. Speaker, they even denied that there was ever any case at a hotel. That was denied over and over, and saying that it is Labour Party spreading those rumors. Mr. Speaker, St. Lucia is a small country. We know. We're also a country that has a very powerful oral history and tradition. So things are said. They're not always true. They're not always the total truth, but there are some things that happens in this country. People know. And then a couple days ago, we had a general manager of a hotel admitting that they had a number of cases at their hotel and the stringent measures they had to put in place. And I applaud him for doing so because it laid bare the character of this government, that they are continuously misleading the people. So we are borrowing money for a COVID response a COVID management that has gone astray. It has gone astray. All the boasts and proclamations they were making, where are they now? A little humility has to settle in, Mr. Speaker, because this is serious business. We've heard that there ought to be second testing. And again, the member from Miku South, the Prime Minister, insists there can be no more second testing. And Mr. Speaker, I heard a clip. The Minister of Health, the person who the COVID bill gives the authority, Mr. Speaker, to make orders, say we do second testing, we do third testing, we even do fourth testing in St. Lucia. And the question raised by the senator on the other side, on our side, flew completely over her head. She didn't even seem to appreciate what second testing was all about. Mr. Speaker, civil society is calling for second testing. And we are calling and repeating again that there must be second testing in St. Lucia. We've heard the statements made by the Prime Minister of Barbados. And I think only yesterday, the CDC in the United States suggested there should even be free tests for travelers, Mr. Speaker. So we are borrowing money. Too little, too late. Because the COVID management plan has gone astray. Mr. Speaker, we need to go back to basics. And we need to go back to this document in many ways, Mr. Speaker, for it to be reviewed and refined, Mr. Speaker. Because we have to establish as our basic guiding principle moving forward that the lives of St. Lucia must always be paramount, must always be. And the resources of the government, the monies we are borrowing, must be primarily focused on safeguarding the lives of St. Lucians, Mr. Speaker. Then, Mr. Speaker, we have to be concerned about the livelihoods of people. We need to be concerned about the quality of life that COVID has imposed. And the member from Castries East was pleading this morning. Sometimes I wonder if members opposite don't have constituents who come to them, people to say that we've not eaten for a couple of days in the house and they need some help. There are people who tell you they can't buy their medication. And I said, a lady came to me, Mr. Speaker, and it was painful. She now takes her medication every other day so it can stretch. Yeah, I know I always have a story, but these are real life stories. Real, and these are the stories that guide me, Mr. Speaker, in my decision making. So we have to be concerned, Mr. Speaker, like the member from Castries East said, about the people out there who are suffering, Mr. Speaker. There is not enough in there for these people. I am still concerned about the children who cannot be part of online learning because they have no devices. Doesn't that bother us, Mr. Speaker? I still have a list of parents and children that want tablets, Mr. Speaker, because they cannot participate in online learning. This government stopped the laptop program. We've been faced by this pandemic since March, and we are going to lose a generation of St. Lucians who would have not benefited from proper schooling and learning ever since this crisis started. No devices, no Wi-Fi in the community. What's happening to those children? And we're borrowing monies now when we could have done this some time ago. Instead, we're building the Rodney Bay roundabout. We're building roads all over Grosley. We're building all over the country, and more to be built, Mr. Speaker. And I'm not saying do not build roads, do not repair roads. I'm speaking about the balance between how much we put towards people's lives, their livelihoods, and those we put for the economic recovery and stimulation that's needed. Mr. Speaker, the member from Castries East spoke of why he signed a Recover St. Lucia document. And I've been wondering about it, Mr. Speaker, because this document and this process was supposed to produce a Recover St. Lucia plan. Because this was supposed to be private sector, public sector, civil society. And together, this was supposed to be produced. And I love this document for true, Mr. Speaker. It was supposed to be the blueprint. But yet, the private sector is now coming up with its own Recover St. Lucia plan. Is that a very subtle way of telling the government that you have failed miserably? Maybe it's a subtle way of saying to them that you'll fail miserably when you prepared this plan. Because if we had done a truly national recovery and resilience plan together with the same people who are preparing this Recover St. Lucia plan, there will be no need for it. There will be no need for the Chamber of Commerce and the SLHTA to be preparing any Recover St. Lucia plan if this had been done properly. But let me just say one thing on this, Mr. Speaker. There can be no Recover St. Lucia unless we have a Unite St. Lucia. None. It will not work. Because there is a politicization of assistance under this government. And I've been saying so since March. There are people who receive foodstuff. It was politicized. Some needed it. I won't doubt that. But a lot of people who needed it did not get it. We know from the week of the lockdown what happened with the distribution of the massive food bags. We know what happened. Some constituencies were made to suffer. I know in my constituency we got nothing until the 6th day. I was lucky. Well, Mr. Speaker, there are people who were driving around distributing meals. And it was politicized. There are contracts being given all over my constituency. All over. Politicize the assistance. Return to school. Politicize, Mr. Speaker. And I hear in this borrowing, there will be money to help vulnerable families. Should I have confidence that it will not be politicized again? Should I? There are people doing small projects all over the constituency. And Mr. Speaker, even before we came to Parliament on this, I had gotten a CPC on it. Somebody was trying to discuss how they're going to fix the Cicero playing field, blah, blah, blah. And they're supposed to be squeezed out of this. Election projects, Mr. Speaker. Election projects. And you're asking me, Mr. Speaker, to have confidence in this government. We need, Mr. Speaker, at this point, when we are borrowing monies and talking about COVID response, we have to bring this country together. We have to press that reset button. I've said so. I always believe, and I'm a person who loves a good debate, a good argument. And we need to do so as politicians, debate the issues. But there are people's lives involved, Mr. Speaker. There are people suffering in this country. There are fishermen and farmers and bus drivers and people in the creative industries that are suffering in this country. And Christmas is coming. And the anxiety level is rising, the frustration is rising, Mr. Speaker. Because these people do not know what kind of Christmas they will spend. And the little that we're going to get is being politicized. There is no conscience in this government. None. No conscience. It's going to get worse, Mr. Speaker. And you know why it's going to get worse? As they go on the ground and they feel the wrath of the people, the nepotism will rise. The politicization will rise because they will be in survival mode now. Because the people will be showing them that they are rising against what they're doing. And money will become the order of the day. Money. Buy people loyalty. Because they know the people are suffering. They know it, Mr. Speaker. And you're asking me to repurpose $20 million, Mr. Speaker? $20 million? Given the state of this country right now, because of the effect of COVID, $20 million. Now you want to repurpose? Now? This is too little, too late, Mr. Speaker. I want to end, Mr. Speaker, by saying I cannot in principle call for repurposing, and when it is done, to oppose it. I believe the people of St. Lucia need support. The struggling people need support. The starving people need support. The school children need support. But I have no confidence in this government. They've taken too long to take this first step, and it is not a giant enough step. We need more support for our people in St. Lucia. And I want to end by making an appeal to members on the other side. Do not continue to go down that road of stigmatizing St. Lucians because they do not support your party. It is shameful as parliamentary representatives to be in this house and to be shouting and almost seem to be celebrating a belief, a malicious belief, a constructed belief that Labour Party supporters are super spreaders. And then you want this country to unite behind you, unite behind your initiative, unite behind a national endeavor to fight COVID. How can it be achieved? Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Ancillary. Member for Suffer, can you turn off?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to give my fullest and unwavering support to the resolution that's before us today to borrow $20 million to finance expenditures relating to the national COVID response. Mr. Speaker, I do so because not only is the pandemic having severe implications and severe disruptions to countries around the world, but Mr. Speaker, the approach to the COVID response by this government has been very comprehensive, wide-ranging, Mr. Speaker, taking into account, Mr. Speaker, the public health fight, but at the same time, Mr. Speaker, as well, ensuring that there is a very strong, realistic, and pragmatic economic recovery initiative. Mr. Speaker, I just want to highlight a couple of measures that the resolution and this loan seeks to address. And Mr. Speaker, the whole issue of small and medium-sized businesses that will be able to get support to help their situation, Mr. Speaker, is an important one. One, Mr. Speaker, where we see, as you go to the length and breadth of the country, that small businesses are indeed struggling, are indeed finding it very difficult to deal with the fallout that has happened to the economy. Mr. Speaker, I'm also, as the tourism minister, very encouraged to hear that the resolution made allowances for tourism businesses. A lot of them are small and medium-sized businesses as well, very small hotels, taxi drivers, when we think of restaurants, people in the event sector. And Mr. Speaker, the list goes on of the number of small and medium-sized businesses that will no doubt benefit and profit from this initiative. So, Mr. Speaker, this is really a positive, ensuring that we cater to livelihoods while we attempt to save lives. Mr. Speaker, the manufacturing and agricultural sector have not been left out. I'm from a farming constituency. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to say today that the Roseau Valley does contribute significantly to the total exports of bananas. The last number I saw suggested that we export some 30% of the total banana exports to the UK. But my colleague, Minister of Agriculture, will qualify those figures. But, Mr. Speaker, to see that this resolution contributing significantly to the agricultural sector is good news for me, and it is good news for the farmers of ancillary canneries. And so, Mr. Speaker, I am obligated to support it on their behalf, Mr. Speaker, because of the comprehensive nature of it. Mr. Speaker, no doubt we have to lend a helping hand. But it wasn't just businesses, Mr. Speaker, that this government has catered to in its response. You would recall, Mr. Speaker, that when we came to the House, some of the very same members who got up and spoke were in criticism of us borrowing monies from the NIC to help the workers of this country. But today, Mr. Speaker, they can say that we should be giving more support to the workers of the country. But, Mr. Speaker, the facts are there to show that over 8,000 individuals applied, and my information tells me that most of those applications, Mr. Speaker, gained support. We went a step further, Mr. Speaker, and we also had what was called the Income Support Program, catering to those individuals who, Mr. Speaker, would not have otherwise registered with the NIC, your taxi drivers, your vendors, your little bar owners, and self-employed individuals, Mr. Speaker. Over 6,000 of them received payments, Mr. Speaker, from the government's economic recovery program and social stabilization programs. So, Mr. Speaker, what we have done since the management of this pandemic is an approach that has been comprehensive. It has been a proactive approach, Mr. Speaker. From very early on, we saw that there were going to be fallout in the various sectors of our society, and we put a comprehensive plan in place. We engaged the various sectors in the country. We engaged the private sector. We engaged the opposition. We engaged all stakeholders, Mr. Speaker, in ensuring that we have the very best solutions to come up with interventions that can help, Mr. Speaker, ameliorate some of the challenges that people are facing at the very levels. Mr. Speaker, a lot was said today by the speaker before me about the management of the pandemic by the government. Mr. Speaker, let me categorically say that the member from Castries South, whose credibility is of ill repute, Mr. Speaker, that to suggest that St. Lucia is among the worst prepared, in his words, is, Mr. Speaker, ridiculous. It's ludicrous. Mr. Speaker, as of today, the Center for Disease Control has placed some 18 Caribbean countries at level 4. But St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, despite the recent outbreak of cases which we see, Mr. Speaker, in our community, remains among 7 Caribbean countries that is at level 2 of the Center for Disease Control. Now, Mr. Speaker, you tell me, if there is no success, why would the CDC have St. Lucia at level 2 while placing 18 countries in the Caribbean at level 4? Mr. Speaker, who would you listen to? The member for Castries South, who has come to this honorable house and has changed his figures over and over about the amount of monies that we borrowed. The last time he was here, he said that we borrowed some $2 billion. Today, he said it is $1.5 billion. Now, Mr. Speaker, what should we believe? What is really the truth? Is it $2 billion? Is it 1.5? Is he going to come with another story tomorrow? Mr. Speaker, it is very, very hard to track the opposition. And if it's one thing you can rely on them for, it is to be inconsistent. It is to be duplicitous. It is to not level with the people of St. Lucia. And Mr. Speaker, when you are dealing with a pandemic such as what we are dealing with right now, there is no time for fooling around. There is no time for cheap politics. There is no time, Mr. Speaker, for selfish political gains. Mr. Speaker, at this time, this is when the best version of a parliamentarian must emerge to ensure that the people of St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, are not robbed of the best and valuable information that needs to go to them so that they can play their part in the management of this whole COVID response. Mr. Speaker, Victoria Hospital, the only thing he has said that I agree with is that Victoria Hospital has never been as it is today. It has never looked so bright. And so, Mr. Speaker, let us not take a snippet. Let us not take a snippet and to use that to tell a story. Mr. Speaker, the majority of the rooms at Victoria Hospital have been comprehensively overhauled. The majority of the rooms at Victoria Hospital are in better shape than they have ever been in the last 35 years. And that is the truth, Mr. Speaker, because what we did, Mr. Speaker, as part of the COVID response, we opened up the Owen King EU Hospital, realizing that there is going to be some need, Mr. Speaker, at some point in the management of the pandemic for extra bed space. So what did we do? We expedited the opening of the hospital. Mr. Speaker, we then got the Cuban Medical Brigade to help beef up the capacity of the health services of our country so that our health workers, Mr. Speaker, can get the assistance required to be able to manage the COVID response in a good manner. Mr. Speaker, we then went and we undertook, Mr. Speaker, a most comprehensive job to overhaul the Victoria Hospital. And yes, Mr. Speaker, when we would have finished with COVID-19, this will go into the bed stock, Mr. Speaker, of the national inventory of bed stock required for the management of health in this country. Why would that be criticized today? Because a politician wants to score points? Mr. Speaker, this is sad. This is low, and this is petty, and it is cheap. And we need to stop it, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, the management of this pandemic, I propose to this House, has been one of the best in the Caribbean. One of the best in the Caribbean. Mr. Speaker, I didn't say that, but CARFA says it. Mr. Speaker, when you look at what has happened, we've had several nationals stuck abroad. Some 795 of them, Mr. Speaker, were stuck abroad. There were people who were working on cruise ships, and those individuals, Mr. Speaker, had some psychological issues because they were quarantined and confined because of the countries that they were in, Mr. Speaker. The emotional trauma of being stuck in a cabin of a cruise industry. But this government, Mr. Speaker, through our obligation and through our sympathy and through our understanding of the need for our people to come home and be with your family in such a precarious and difficult time, we didn't count pennies. We ensure, Mr. Speaker, despite all of the declines we have seen in the revenues of our country, that we prioritize the returning, the repatriation of our nationals who were stuck abroad. And so, Mr. Speaker, just with the cruise ship workers alone, there were 795. There were hundreds others, Mr. Speaker, which we brought home via airplane, Mr. Speaker, while the world and countries were shut down, while the opposition members were at home watching television. We were there busy working to get people to come back to this country, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, while you are repatriating nationals from COVID hotspots, you know what it required? It required a significant investment in quarantine facilities. And so, Mr. Speaker, at peak, we had over 500 quarantine facilities which were operating, Mr. Speaker, so that the people that were coming in can have a very comfortable and safe quarantine environment. Mr. Speaker, I saw pictures from other islands. And when you compare our quarantine facilities, we were putting them in hotels, Mr. Speaker, while some islands were using schools, Mr. Speaker. And now the member for Castries South would now open his mouth to say that St. Lucia has mismanaged the COVID-19 initiative. Mr. Speaker, our quarantine facilities were among the best. And our quarantine management was among the best. And so, Mr. Speaker, we had these hotels, and I want to thank the private sector for their cooperation and their significant support which they've given to us, Mr. Speaker, all through, Mr. Speaker, the management of this pandemic, Mr. Speaker. We've had their significant cooperation. At present, there are some 153 hotel rooms which we're currently operating as quarantine facilities, Mr. Speaker. But this is as the industry open up, Mr. Speaker, and I'll deal with the performance of the industry in a little while in my presentation. Mr. Speaker, the second testing has become part of this debate in the Parliament. And Mr. Speaker, whenever you float things around, you must also do so to establish a proper context and to establish a story, Mr. Speaker. And that story, Mr. Speaker, must tell a tale. You must rationalize, you must analyze numbers and figures, and you must understand that countries have peculiar circumstances. And so, while we as a government remain very open to learning from other countries and, Mr. Speaker, instituting best practices from around the world for the management of COVID-19, we are also, Mr. Speaker, mindful of our own peculiar circumstances and mindful of our own situation. So if, for example, I had to compare our tourism industry and the reopening of our industry with that of Barbados, right, which is one of the jurisdictions where the second testing is being instituted. Mr. Speaker, in Barbados, there are some 3,000 long-stay visitors because they have a long-stay program which they have promoted for tourists to come to their country. It would mean, Mr. Speaker, that being there for a significant amount of time and working and living in Barbados remotely would then suggest that you need to have a mechanism in place where people that are coming from COVID hotspots, that those individuals would need to be first quarantined. And so they have a lot more time than the average visitor who is coming for 5, 6, or 7 days. And so, Mr. Speaker, that coupled with the fact that in Barbados you have a lot of villas, EP Hotel, and I made that point in the last Parliament, their tourism architecture is a lot more driven by restaurants and moving about than ours, which is driven in the main by a lot of all-inclusives. And so, Mr. Speaker, what we sought to do was, one, have a pre-testing mechanism in place. So the guests would come in, they pre-test. But then, Mr. Speaker, that was backed up by a very strong defense and a strong wall of very stringent and robust protocols. And those protocols, Mr. Speaker, ensure that when you come to a hotel in St. Lucia, that we just don't allow you to roam about, as they do in Barbados. Because we believe that even if you take a second test, there's still a risk. And the medical experts are suggesting, and this is widely accepted in the medical fraternity, that even when a second test is done, there's still risk. So do we want now to do a second test on the third day of the vacation and send people to roam about in our communities and go at the Castries market and shake the hands of our vendors and go to our bars in Castries South, in Banan, and to mingle with our constituents in these areas, and go to the Mang in Vieux-Fort, and go to Marcia, and go to all of these communities, and to deal with nationals after the third day of arriving? Is that what we're suggesting? Because this is the motivation behind the second test. What we are saying, if you do the second test, there's going to be an anticipation that the guests can now roam about. But, Mr. Speaker, that is dangerous if you're not going to accompany that with the protocols. the protocols, every single place where there have been compliance to the protocols have worked. And that is a fact. So that's why, Mr. Speaker, in supermarkets, we don't see a large transmission. We don't see them from banks. We don't see them from establishments that are running their facilities with a very strong adherence and enforcement of the protocols. Where we have seen transmission is where our nationals, us, Mr. Speaker, St. Lucians, have not complied with the protocols. And that has been the thing. So if you take the march of the SLP, for example, Mr. Speaker, yes, the march is reckless. You do not have a march exposing hundreds of people in a pandemic because of political purposes. That is reckless and irresponsible. How are you going to control hundreds of people who were there chanting in the emotion of a political spectacle in the blazing heat of the sun? How are you going to help them to keep their mask on? Mr. Speaker, it is difficult for members to even speak in the House with their mask, and there are pictures all over social media with people in the march who are together in close proximity with each other and not wearing the mask. What we are saying, Mr. Speaker, is that the leadership of the SLP has exposed hundreds of individuals to COVID-19, and that's what we're saying. So there's no redrawing of any statement. It is reckless. You cannot defend that. But, Mr. Speaker, I am proud, because the United Workers' Party this past weekend, we had our national convention where we had voting. And, Mr. Speaker, I went to vote in a community center in Millet, and the protocols were enforced. And there were only 20 delegates per each constituency who were going in remote locations, Mr. Speaker. And they all had to comply by wearing their mask. Every single hand was sanitized, Mr. Speaker. And we had our voting to choose members of our executives. But we did so, Mr. Speaker, in the context understanding that while it is important for political parties to exist, but we have to do so with the best interest of our supporters and the general public in mind. And their interest should come first before any political party. And that's what we are saying on this side. That is the difference. That is the difference. That is the difference. And so at no time, Mr. Speaker, during our convention, did you have more than one voter in the community center or in the polling location where the voting was taking place. And that is a mark of being responsible. There's no infringement on anyone's rights. And if the opposition is serious, Mr. Speaker, they will make the sacrifices necessary. They will say to their supporters, Mr. Speaker, because we've seen, Mr. Speaker, in other parts of the world, where a simple thing like wearing your mask is politicized. And if the political establishment don't set the example, then, Mr. Speaker, it is going to be very hard for the technical people to get the support of the general public as it relates to the protocols. And so we, Mr. Speaker, in this House must take the lead. We must set the tone. We must set the narrative. And that is the point. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, the march is reckless. So, Mr. Speaker, what we want to do, Mr. Speaker, is to be responsible at all times. When we're going to take a risk, like having second testing and allow people to roam freely in St. Lucia, then what we have to do, Mr. Speaker, is to make sure that that risk is worth the returns. And what I have seen from the numbers in Barbados, Mr. Speaker, does not suggest that they are getting any more demand by allowing the people to roam. The numbers in St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, in comparison, is over 30% of what we were pre-COVID. When I compare the arrival numbers of what Barbados is doing right now, it is somewhere in the region of about 10% of where they were pre-COVID. And so, Mr. Speaker, being 3 times more, I would say that my initial response to any call for there to be a second test to allow tourists to roam freely, that would be a response of saying, I will caution against it. Because, Mr. Speaker, the risk is too dire. And what we have to do, Mr. Speaker, is make sure that the people of St. Lucia and their safety, that comes first, that comes before business. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 has placed a tremendous pressure on various governments and tourism destinations around the world to strike the balance between tourism and health management. But, Mr. Speaker, if you had to choose one, you clearly have to choose health. Health must win. And then when health wins, Mr. Speaker, then tourism will win. And so, Mr. Speaker, this is our conviction, that health must win. And when health wins, tourism will win. Mr. Speaker, we have seen that with the successful management of this pandemic, which have received tremendous accolades, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that there are countries that call St. Lucia, that call our CMO, and ask her to share the protocols to help them with their reopening. And, Mr. Speaker, that's a fact. And so while the opposition members would like to say that we have mismanaged COVID-19, Mr. Speaker, that's further from the truth. Because the respect around the region for what we have done, our Prime Minister has been selected by CARICOM and also the OECS Prime Ministers to lead the reopening of the tourism industry in the Caribbean. And that is another indication of the confidence that the Caribbean community have in the leadership of St. Lucia in the COVID-19 response. So, Mr. Speaker, the facts are clear. I'm very happy, Mr. Speaker, that so far, even though we've seen a community outbreak, that the cases, mostly all of them, are mild to moderate. And so, Mr. Speaker, out of abundance of caution, we have put these mild to moderate cases where countries would normally have them home quarantine. We have put most of them, Mr. Speaker, in the respiratory hospital so that we can have the best safeguards mechanisms possible. And so, Mr. Speaker, with that outstanding performance in public health management, I must thank the health team. I must thank the finance team. I must thank the AG's office for all the hard work that they have done. The staff of the Ministry of Tourism. I must thank all of the agencies, Mr. Speaker, the Office of the Prime Minister included, NEMO, the police force, and all of the police officers for the tremendous job that they are doing, the frontliners, for the hard sacrifices that they continue to make, Mr. Speaker. All of them are deserving of tremendous praise for the great job that they continue to do in the management of this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, the reopening of St. Lucia's tourism industry is among the best in the Caribbean. And let me tell you why. Mr. Speaker, as of July, we had some 2,751 arrivals. As of August, we had 4,175. As of September, we had 4,672. As of October, Mr. Speaker, we peaked at 4,854, about 35% of where we were pre-COVID-19. But, Mr. Speaker, came the UK lockdown in the month of November. And in the month of November, Mr. Speaker, we see somewhat of a decline in the performance because, Mr. Speaker, of the UK market being shut down. It means, therefore, that we came in at 5,030 visitors year to date. That, Mr. Speaker, brings us to a total of 25,175 visitors. Mr. Speaker, 80% of our hotel rooms are open. Plus, Mr. Speaker, 80 hotels, including Airbnbs, are also open. So the leader of the opposition was inaccurate in suggesting that the Airbnbs had not been open. So I just want to update the House and by way of information indicate to the leader of the opposition that there are some 27 what we call the informal accommodation sector that have been open. So again, I'm calling on the opposition members, before you come and make pronouncements, do check, do fact check, because if you put it out there, people are likely to believe you. So we're asking to check with the authorities before making pronouncements. Mr. Speaker, there are over 300 taxi drivers that are back in operation. One of the areas in the transportation sector that we continue to empathize with, and my colleague, Minister of Ports, Honorable Stevenson King, and member for Castries North, and I are working very feverishly to see how best we can remedy the situation where a number of taxi drivers who ply their trade via the internet, or what you call the H-plates, Mr. Speaker, are not in operation at present. But, Mr. Speaker, we want to empathize with them. We want to say to them, Mr. Speaker, that we are working hard as a government to also bring them into the mix so that they too can get some of the returns that are coming from the great success of our tourism industry. Mr. Speaker, up until last night, very late in the night, we were working with the various agencies to arrive at a situation where we can get these drivers back into operation so that they could feed their families, service their loans, and, Mr. Speaker, participate in the economic recovery, which is moving very nicely. Mr. Speaker, there's good news coming from the UK in terms of the airlift situation. And so already there is a lot of confidence in St. Lucia as a destination from the United Kingdom market. And so, Mr. Speaker, as of December 3rd, one day after the lockdown and the very first day of the reopening of the UK market, we see that the UK, Thomson Airline is going to resume service to St. Lucia from Gatwick Airport. And then, Mr. Speaker, a week later, 5 days later, on the 8th of December, Thomson Airline will also resume service from Manchester Airport. Mr. Speaker, on the 10th of December, we will have the first British Airways flights. And then, Mr. Speaker, on the 12th, 2 days later, we will go back to a daily service from British Airways. Only 2 of these flights will be tagged with Grenada, so it means, Mr. Speaker, that we would have had more capacity from British Airways pre-COVID. Mr. Speaker, there is so much demand for St. Lucia in the UK market that British Airways, they've had to put on a second flight on the 27th of December, and also, Mr. Speaker, a second flight on the 3rd of January, because, Mr. Speaker, the demand and the rebound in the UK is so strong for St. Lucia, and the pace is looking extremely well. And so, Mr. Speaker, we are encouraged by this. While we have not retained the COVID levels, but we are very encouraged by what we see, the extra flights that are coming, Mr. Speaker, and the last-minute bookings that are coming in. Mr. Speaker, this really is the fruit of a very successful campaign which we have had in the UK market as we continue to promote St. Lucia as a brand in that market. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are some 5,000 jobs that have been replaced because of all of this resurgence in tourism. And, Mr. Speaker, what we want to do is continue to grow tourism so that we can grow more jobs, so that we can open up more small businesses. We can create more opportunities for jet ski operators and taxi drivers and day boat charters. And so, Mr. Speaker, this will no doubt put a lot of the people who are out of work back into economic activity. And that's what we're looking forward to do. Mr. Speaker, I think that we are on the right track. I think that notwithstanding the efforts by the opposition to try to undermine our efforts I believe, Mr. Speaker, that the people of St. Lucia are reasonable people, and the facts are before their eyes. They are seeing, Mr. Speaker, that our effort to revitalize this economy through construction is the right way to go. The suggestion here today that we should give people handouts, Mr. Speaker, that's a shame to a lot of people. A lot of people don't want handouts, they want work. And that is the difference between the ideology of our two parties. One of them believing in allowing people to depend on them because they want to be kings in their constituency. What we're saying, Mr. Speaker, is that we believe that by doing the construction, we're creating jobs for people. We are instituting and reinstating their dignity from coming to have to beg a politician for $5. And that is the point, Mr. Speaker. So while, Mr. Speaker, there is some economic fallout, we are dealing with it by using construction as one of those sectors to help to boost the economy, to give it some stimulus, so that, Mr. Speaker, we can get people working all over this country. I am excited by what I'm seeing everywhere. Mr. Speaker, in my constituency, we're almost completed with the preschool rehabilitation, the preschool reconstruction. We're also doing, Mr. Speaker, at present, a new health center for the ancillary village. And I am excited by that. That's going to be completed just in early next year. We should be able to open the facility. We've just demolished the buildings on the waterfront to do our village tourism project in ancillary. And that is exciting. And that, Mr. Speaker, will no doubt help as part of our efforts to continue to stimulate this economy with the construction that is happening everywhere in St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, this is the way to do it. This is the way to do it, to instill pride in people, to develop the country at the same time, and to use COVID-19 as a period by which we can invest in our infrastructure, build the new St. Lucia that we said we would, and continue on that path. So, Mr. Speaker, I end on a note of praise for our health experts, for our team at the command center, for our team at the Ministry of Finance, for the team at the AG's office, and all of the agencies that continue to make sure that St. Lucia do one of the most outstanding jobs in the management of COVID-19 in the Caribbean. Mr. Speaker, I thank you very much for your indulgence.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I beg that we suspend the House for lunch for 1 hour.
Honorable members, the question is that the House stands suspended for the next hour. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. House is suspended.
So the Honorable House has just suspended for lunch. We've so far seen contributions made by government ministers, government representatives, as well as representatives from the opposition for the morning going into the afternoon. The sitting of the House of Assembly will resume later today in about an hour's time, where the debates will continue on the various motions, papers laid, and the bills. Just to go over that information for you. The sitting of the House of Assembly that is ongoing today, Tuesday, the 24th of November, with papers to be laid by the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs and the Public Service, the Honorable Minister for Infrastructure, Ports, Energy and Labor, the Honorable Minister for Commerce, Industry, Enterprise Development and Consumer Affairs, and the Honorable Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries, Fiscal Planning, Natural Resources and Cooperatives. The motions down for consideration include the authorization by Parliament for the Attorney General to make an order to declare that the 2017 supplement to the revised edition of the laws of St. Lucia, as specified by the order, shall come into force on such date as may be appointed by such order as an authoritative version of the law. Also, that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to obtain financing from the Export-Import Bank of Taiwan for the purpose of financing the COVID-19 response project. The following bills are down for consideration: Public Finance Management, Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Amendment, and Credit Reporting. Important to note that these bills down for consideration are entering their second reading in today's sitting. To remind you that the sitting of the House of Assembly today, Tuesday, the 24th of November, has suspended for lunch, and we do hope that you could stay tuned to NTN for the continued proceedings later on today. Stay with us.